So, I'm dealing with this book, this one book, SHLOMO CARLEBACH Torah commentary, Bereshit, first Genesis, and that's it. Whatever is in this book is fair game for me right now, and the rest of it is I'm not going to deal with it. But on the basis of what I see here, he's talking about two covenants. And he focuses covenant number one on Noach, and he focuses covenant number two on Sarah and, well, first of all, Avraham, but also Sarah, his wife. So these two covenants, first of all, I'm going to start making some general conclusions, which I'm sure a certain number of you will find totally unsatisfactory, and you'll be pushing a lot of delete buttons in a moment. But the first thing I want to say, to get to the point here quickly, is by covenant, I see Shlomo is talking about a certain Kabbalistic system of ideas, not a particular document that somebody wrote once upon a time 2 million years ago, with a certain God that I don't know much about myself, so I can't get into all that. But I'm talking about a certain way of thinking that in this book is symbolized on the one hand by one covenant, one agreement with Noach, and on the other agreement with Avraham and Sarah. And of course, as it suits my fancy, it just so happens that since I like to look at things and boil things whenever possible down to their logical foundations, I'm saying right off the bat that when he's talking about Noach, he's talking about what I would say is to a certain extent what would be encompassed in the Aristotelian tradition of Kabbalah, which starting from Aristotle and then highlighted by Maimonides, Guide for the Perplexed, in part 2, where Maimonides quotes 26 principles right out of Aristotle and tells you he's doing that. And then, as Nisan Mandel says in the philosophy of Chabad, since Chabad is a continuation in many ways of Maimonides, so we're talking about Chabad, and we're also talking about Ashlag, which in many ways is also a continuation of that same tradition. And just in short, a couple of notes about that. That's a tradition that sees reality in terms of one big organism, an amoeba, some kind of super life form in which all the parts are related, like the heart is related to the brain, and the whole body is under the supervision of maybe some of the brain or something, or some vitalistic force. And that you can find that in a certain, represented these days, in, for example, in the Chabad Empire, where we have the idea of a Rebbe on top, and all the different organisms in the system are somehow functioning like fingers or pancreases or livers of that Rebbe, that big idea that constitutes the Chabad ideology. And there's a great emphasis on rationalism that comes down a lot from Maimonides' concept, for example, of prophecy and Maimonides' idea, when certain message or light or shefa, abundance flows down from God. It first addresses itself to the left side of the tree of life, the side of Bina, Din, making distinctions. And so Maimonides tells us we first need to use our rational faculties to deal with situations. And then when we get to the end of our wits there, then we're entitled to move over to the right side, to the side of intuition. Okay. Now the second system, the second covenant, the one that involves Abraham and Sarah, is what I'm going to quickly label the opposite tradition of dialectical thinking, which is called the neo-platonic tradition that begins with Plato and Philo, goes on to a lot of stuff in the Middle Ages, going on to, say for example, Ficino and the Italian Renaissance. Then our George Haman in the Christian tradition, and leading up to Breslav, nachman of Breslav, and here we have Shlomo Carlebach as the latest edition of neo-platonic philosophy in Judaism. Now that takes chutzpah to say that, doesn't it? And they just made a lot of enemies. Now, just like any major rebbe, it's not a question of either or. There's a certain amount of this and a certain amount of that. It's just a matter of emphasis. So I'm saying that what I see here is about 2/3 emphasis on nachman of Breslav and 1/3 emphasis perhaps on chabbad. We know historically that Rav Shlomo was a student of Chabad for a long time, and we know that he also was heavily influenced by the whole hippie phenomenon and all that stuff, which had a lot of mystical drug influences that took people away from such a rationalist tradition into a more spaced out tradition. And so I think, like myself, who, I mean, that same 60s, 70s thing blew me right out of medical school and blew me right into New York experimental theater world. Now, I know how strong that stuff can be, and I just like everybody else, I was playing around a little bit of weed, but I don't know what kind of stuff what went through Shlomo Carlebach's mind. Like I say, I don't know much about him, but it seems historically that it makes a certain kind of sense. But again, what I'm basing myself here is on the book, and I see it in the book, and that's what I want to try to demonstrate here in this video. It might take one video, it might take a couple more. I don't know how until I get this message out here. I want to do it justice because it's a big message. Okay, so that's my basic flight plan here, and like I said, I have 10 sections from the book that I want to deal with. Comparing basically Noah thinking with Abraham, Sarah thinking. All right. Let's see now. The question is, there's so much here. I don't know where to begin, frankly. But like I said, begin at the beginning, or begin in the middle. Begin somewhere. Here's my list of main points that are from the Noach dialectic, and maybe I'll start off with that. That seems to be a little simpler to get a grip on, first of all. So my first section from the book is section page 85, and it's called To Be a Kabbalist, a Receiver. And that right away gives us a clue. And here's something he says. There's so much light in the world. As long as the world is existing, there is so much light coming down from heaven. It's unbelievable how much energy there really is. So what happens to it? Sadly enough, most of it is just floating around. Nobody picks it up. Nobody stops to pick it up. You know what Noah did? Can you imagine one good man in a whole lot? Where does he get his strength from? He picked up this light that simply exists as long as the world exists. Again, he picked up this light that simply exists as the world exists. Now that's a loaded sentence. So what kind of light can we be picking up? He just picked it up now. You know, Shlomo Carlebach is not known for his precise logical prose here. He's talking in metaphors, he's talking in all kinds of images that he likes to use, stories. All right. It's not like one day Noah, when he goes out there and looks up in the heavens, and oh boy, look at that light! I'll pick some here, I'll pick some there, I'll pick some there. Put it in my pocket. Okay, now I'm a paragon of virtue or something like that. No, not that. This is. I'm looking for the logic. If you want to get a whole string of metaphors and songs and enjoy yourself, go back to Shlomo. Then you don't need me for that. But like I said, full step in where angels fear to tread. All right. So I'm gonna say right off the bat that just like in the previous video when I was talking about motion, I use Gestalt therapy as a very simple way to deal with very complicated stuff. If you know something about Gestalt therapy, what it is, and if you don't know, go back to video number 1 and find out. But I'm not going to take the whole another half an hour to explain it here. So let me just start off right about with what it is that I'm maintaining that Noach represents is, well, let's start the basic concept of, one basic concept of Gestalt therapy is what's called the rhythm of contact and withdrawal. The rhythm of contact and withdrawal. The process works that at the beginning I'm aware of a lot of different things, I contact a lot of different things. I'm aware of, right now I'm aware of green, something over there, and I'm aware of something blue over here, and I'm aware of something black over here, and I'm aware of something brownish over there. Okay, I got a bunch of awarenesses, and somehow my mind is a Gestalt figure ground process going on here, and I put it together and I say, colors, I'm aware of colors. But you notice I started from individual colors rather than just saying the room is full of colors, like a lot of people would do in a Gestalt session, and just lose the concrete here and now experiences. So I'm saying that energy, those awareness moments are energy. They're energy. Little moments of energy. And you might say in a certain kind of a quasi-scientific sense here that if I do a whole 3 hours of Gestalt work on awareness and I'm loaded up with energy, you know, a person can get a moment of enlightenment, a kind of a high out of that. It happens a lot. And that explosion into some kind of emotion or some kind of idea, something or other, you can look at it as kind of reaching a high level of energy. An energy of activation, you might say. If you want to feel like thermodynamics, you know, the energy of activation somehow affects the whole entropy of the system, and boing, the next thing you know, release free energy, and that gives you the exothermic reaction to do your explosion, etc., etc. But anyway, there's energy out there. Energy also, Shlomo is using the word energy. These days when we talk about energy, we think about energy versus matter, a hybrid relationship. You know, an electron is energy, and if as matter, and it's a wave. As a wave, it's it's matter as if you think of it as something, a blob that's an electron, or if it's wave, it's a wave energy. So it's back and forth. It could be either one depending on how you look at it, how you measure it, etc., etc. Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You don't know what it is because it can't be more precise than what it is you're trying to measure, etc., like that. So we have the idea of a resonance system where two opposites are somehow or other in some kind of totally illogical, unfathomable relationship together. All right, so anyway, energy. So if we think of this awareness stuff as the energy, and think of our everyday lives as matter or something like that, then so we have an opposition there, okay? So Noach is collecting awareness moments. Now, in Gestalt therapy process, this is called this process of collecting awareness moments. The first part, all the contact experiences, is called the objective history. Very important term, objective history, and I'm using the word objective in this. I got that word from Hegel, I think, way back a long time ago. So it's a history of what goes on. In terms of the spiral of the dialectic, each time a circle, you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, of dialectical logic. And again, I explained all this in the first video. If you don't want to bother to go back and listen to it, that's not my problem. So this endless spiraling, each time you have a awareness of this and awareness of the opposite, somehow something else, and they end up being some kind of relationship of opposition. And we have a series of opposites somehow or other, and every time I get to it, the opposites have an impasse to it eventually, so then I close my eyes and go inside, do the withdrawal process, and I get a new idea from the void, all that stuff. That's the dialectical process, the synthesis that's involved here. Okay, in a Gestalt awareness session. Now, you could describe exactly the same thing in terms of Sephirot and heavens and all kinds of Kabbalistic mumbo jumbo, and I'm not quibbling with that. That's equally valid jargon if you like to think in that way. But what I'm talking about is something that I could do with a person in an hour, half an hour, not 3 hours, and see results in front of my dumb scientific nose there without having to get involved in a lot of mumbo jumbo. So in that sense, this objective history, if I do a work like this with somebody for 3 hours, it's going to be maybe 20 different cycles around that thing of awareness, where you get aware of something, and then get to the opposite, and then you go inside, etc., etc., etc. And as long as I'm focusing on this continuous process of awareness, 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 and dialogue, 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 a little bit of withdrawal each time, the emphasis on mostly on contact. And that's the sense in which Noah is collecting energy. All right? So what else? Now I could go back to the chapter there and read an enormous amount of stuff, but I'm just going to take my notes here, because otherwise I'll never get into some of the other stuff here. So some of the other things that Shlomo mentions in that chapter, that this is a passive state of being awareness. He's aware. He's resting. Shlomo talks about this is something you get to after all the ego klipot fall off. Right, he talks about this being a state that we get to after Yom Kippur, if you've done all your theological homework and you've cleaned yourself out, your neshama out. So then you hear again, you're starting awareness and awareness and awareness. Every child, in a sense, is in a certain hypothetical sense, is it a kind of a blank book, blank blackboard or something, that sheet of paper that starts writing from scratch, Of course, it never happens, but this is idealistic thinking. And so at the end of that chapter, begins page 85, we see Noah as a symbol of a covenant. The covenant that this world will always be renewed, because this awareness stuff is endless, and if it didn't happen, the person wouldn't be alive, An amoeba is in contact with another amoeba, with the water, or with what he's nibbling at that moment. That basic process of an organism relating to either to environment or to its own body or to its needs or fantasies or whatever, that is by definition endless, because otherwise there'd be nobody around to talk about it. So what we can't talk about is endless, and what we don't know about, we're dead anyway, so it doesn't matter. Okay. So that's the example of Noah. Let's take the same. How does that contrast with the dialectic, the Platonic system? So going back, that was an organismic model, Awareness is a spiral here is an organic process. You see it in the helix of DNA. You see it in the spiral of the Kabbalah. It's a life process, and it lends itself to what's called inductive logic rather than deductive logic. The deductive logic is a system. I have an idea. Let's see. There's cars, so then there's Chryslers and there's Fords breaking up cars, and then inside every Chrysler, there's the seat, and there's the lights, and there's the motor, and there's endless ramifications. You take the idea of car, you break it down into a big system. That's called deductive logic, from the general to the specific. The opposite of that is inductive logic. I start from a million moments of awareness, and by doing what I just did, there's an integrated process goes on until we get to the big explosion or enlightenment moment, and the whole idea of glory of God, the same process, the Hebrew word for glory, koved, tangibility. Tangibility. What's tangible? I'm aware of this, I'm aware of that. Everything is tangible, and it's a kind of integral calculus. We add them all up from 1 to infinity, and that's the glory of God at that moment, or however. All right, next. So that's an organic system. That's Aristotelian, Maimonides type thinking. Now, what's the opposite of that? Okay. So here we have Abraham. And the opposite of that is not a one big organism, but a split dualistic way of thinking, where there's the pure ideas up there, the macrocosm, the ideas in the mind of God, or the ideas in some world of pure ideas. And by the way, my reference here is Harry Wilson's book on Philo, which is a beautiful basic description of how this, the different levels of Platonic thinking work in Judaism. So there are four levels. There's the ideas in God, then there's the world of pure ideas, which is also somehow part of God, and then there's a break. The microcosm is where we live. So we have two levels. We have the ideas, what we call essences, our pure idea, for example, our pure idea of love, pure idea of courage, pure idea of beauty, these things, but on a human level, that's the third level down. And that's the first level of the microcosm. The second level of microcosm is when these ideas are all messed up, our everyday level. So we have four levels, and I'm very much simplifying just to get to, so we can say something, instead of trying to say everything about nothing. I'm going to try to say something about something here. That's why I need to break it down to some things we could talk about without diagrams and everything else. So, okay, we got this dualistic model here with four levels. You can think of it as Atzilut, the world of Atzilut, if you're at the Zohar Kabbalah, the world, ideas in the mind of God, or B'riyah, the world of pure ideas, Yitzirah, the pure ideas, but on our level, created the level of soul, creation here. And then beyond, the last level is the level of imperfection, asiyah. Think of it as those four levels as our basic thinking model here. Okay, so going to go into his book on page number 94. We have the example. So for 85, that chapter was mostly about. Oops, dropped my paper here. Mostly about Noah. And this one, 94, he starts talking about Abraham. And it's called God's World. So now, it's interesting, he uses the idea of taste. He says, Noah didn't have a taste yet of every human being. He was preoccupied with saving the world, but well, he says, a lot of people are very big on saving the world. They might not care for human beings. So he's giving the example of Noah, since he's in this system of opposites and all the time this spiral of each set of opposites giving way to another set of opposites. It's all the time in terms of types, rather than individuals. And this is a crucial point here. Avraham, in this system here, represents individual, what a lot of philosophers would call individuality, whereas Noah in this system represents a system of types. You have the same thing, for example, in Michael Chekhov's approach to the theater acting technique. He says a bad actor plays always a type. He plays the different types of his personality, whereas a good actor knows how to go inside to get to the roots of his personality, his being, his eye consciousness, his higher self, whatever you want to call it, and is freed from those types and is able to play the living reality of each moment free of those types. Doesn't mean you leave the types behind, but you're at a higher level so that you're in touch with purer ideas, and you could illuminate the junk collage, the dead forms, from this point of free spirit, you might say. So Shlomo is giving us exactly that same idea of a performer on top of his material, illuminating his junk collage, dead form, which is basically Platonic thinking of two levels: the free performer on top with his ideas from heaven or wherever, and from the here and now, the messianic now, versus the score of forms that he's performing here, which he built up out of the types that he's made out of in his life, and then illuminating somehow those dead forms with the here and now inspiration. I could illustrate that very quickly here. let's say I want to take the idea of, hello, how are you? Hi. Now, hi, how you doing out there? Hi, hi, hi. I took this form, that's a form, and I did it the way we usually do it. We use it as part of a certain matrix of social behaviors. Hi, hi, hi. Means a certain thing. Now, if I am an actor and I want to, let's say I have this form from my collection of personal forms that I've prepared formally, then I want to use that action as part of a score in some kind of a theater piece where I'm very freely playing with my material, like a child plays with stereotypes. You know, like a kid can do a good caricature of the policeman on the corner there. Same thing here. An actor could take this form and say, what if I make this form? What if I pretend it's in water, you know? Well, what if I pretend that this form is blowing in the wind somehow? Or what if I take it upside down and pretend that this form is some kind of a thing that's saying hi to somebody 1,000 miles down there, and I'm doing it through some molasses here, and I put that whole idea, then the form becomes very different. It's my hi filtered through that different way of looking at it, for the different here and now idea. So the process is very basic to human thinking, whether you are locked into your forms or whether you're on some higher level on top of the forms, dualistically speaking, like in this Platonic system of the macrocosm and the microcosm. Okay, so now, going back to Shlomo here. Okay, so that sense again, a lot of people are very big on, so to speak, saving the world. They might not care for human beings, but they sure care for the world. When God made a covenant never to destroy the world, He gave us a little taste of how much chesed He put into the world when He created it. Olam chesed yibaneh, a different kind of compassion, something much deeper. Okay, so he's talking about Noah, who likes the idea of saving the world, so he's going to make an ark, versus Avraham, who sees the whole town of Sodom over there, and he feels that rather than destroy the whole town, if we could find one real individual there that has spirituality, that person is worth somehow more than the whole category of Sodom. So somehow or other he finds Lot, and that leads to Ruth, leads to Mashiach, and that's the folklore story that justifies his individuality rather than surrendering to stereotypes of good and evil. And that makes Abraham the paradigm case of a person able to distinguish between a type and an individual. And we keep hearing the same thing over and over again here. And one way to describe it is the taste metaphor. Taste is a sense, or smell is a sense, it's holistic. Whereas I see something specific, I smell, the fragrance of the Lord or something like that, or the fragrance of the food. It's an encompassing sense. And so smell or taste are examples that Shlomo uses to illustrate the difference between individuality and a type. So human, Noah, well, here's what he says about Noah in 94. When God made a covenant never to destroy the world, He gave us a little taste of how much chesed He put into the world when He created it. That's just a little taste, okay? It's the covenant that He will allow this endless objective history, this spiral of the opposites all the time, leading to more opposites and going on and on and on. He's gonna. That's an example of a little taste of eternity. But the example, the idea of individuality, when a person, when Abraham contacts his own individuality, the deeper truth of that, and he contacts the individuality and goes beyond stereotypes of people. For example, these three guys that show up for a meal, and finds their spirituality, and he finds the spirituality of Lot there, and out of the huge pile of sinners in Sodom, whatever it is. All examples of using his holistic sense of he smells that there's a good guy out there. You can taste it, you can smell it, and that's the difference here on that level. And another example that Shlomo gives, only when you see them. A lot of people have compassion with other people, but only when they see them, and that's the awareness level. But he gives an example of himself, what he'd like to do, or what Avraham would like to do. Avraham is waiting on a street corner looking for the next schnorrer to go by so he can invite him to his house. That's an example of somehow or other going beyond the need to just see the person and to size him up. Is this a good guy or not good a guy? You know, is this guy going to make a mess out of my house? Is this guy going to eat me out of house and home? Whatever it is. Rather, he just invites the guy because he has this need coming from the void, this infinite need to embody this total chesed, this total grace. Okay, so now philosophically, how do we represent that? If we represent the Aristotle model with the spiral, so we have the Plato model with the four levels, with the two worlds separated by a gap to the other two worlds. You know, we have Asiya, Yetzirah, and then we have a gap, and then we have Bariya, and we have Atzilut, the four levels there. Okay. Alright, so here's how Shlomo summarizes that idea of this other kind of covenant. When Abraham entered the covenant with God, in other words, different than Noah's covenant, he was mamish so filled with God, God shined into him so much that he had a taste, and there's that magical word, taste, holistic experience. His nose somehow told him how much God wanted to give when he created the world. So I want to do the same. I don't want to be at a level where I need to see a poor schlepper to excite me, to give me compassion. I want to be out there looking for the poor man, okay? He wants to be looking for the poor man. Now, philosophically, that's the idea of this enormous need to be looking for something that's missing is a metaphorical, a poetic way of talking about what philosophically, Kabbalistically would be the concept of tzimtzum, that just like in the model we had with the Aristotelian model where we have two opposites and then somehow you got to go inside to find the new idea, here the two opposites are so extreme, totally opposite, that there's no possible way that they could possibly come together. And the person is in that situation of being, here I am in a microcosm, and somehow what I need to get to, what I'm longing for, is the next level up. I'm in Yetzirah, Asiyah, and I need to get to Bariya. I have no way to get there. I have no techniques to do that. There's no system. It's not an organism. It's just a total opposite, otherness. The only way to get there is like all the pietist religious people would say, is with a leap of faith. Okay, leap of faith. You somehow jump out of your skin, and that's the idea of going beyond yourself. Grotowski theater, they used to say, tell the actors, go beyond yourself. You know, by the way, Grotowski was in the physical theater world of the 70s that I was involved in a little bit. You know, they used to tell the actor, you know, here you are practically dying there from physical exertion and emotional stress in this workshop for 10 days, like I went through once. And meanwhile, the director's saying, now go across yourself, in kind of Polish English, you know. So what are they talking about? It's the same idea, that there's somehow this pure idea that's waiting for you on the level of Bria is waiting there, but you got to push yourself from the level of the first two worlds to get to that, to your breaking point. So you have the idea of the negation of the negation, the two opposites. Each of these opposites is a negation of the oneness, and you got to negate those negations, the death of ego, you know, to get to that void, so that you can discover who your new self is. Since you only know once you get there. All right. Okay. So you have a taste, you have a sense that there's something waiting for you there, and it's, the taste metaphor is lovely. I see it. If I keep going like this video is going to take about 10 hours. I don't know where I'll go with this, but I'll just try to keep going here. Another example we have here is, okay, Avraham being tested by the three angels. Now, philosophically speaking, I ask myself, obviously, they just happen to be three, why three? But if you think of the basic principles of dialectical thinking, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and if we talk about the idea of Platonic anamnesis, not, and is not, and amnesis is forgetting, not forgetting, in other words, going back to your origin, looking for the pure ideas that make you up in your life. And that's another way of talking about this process of dialectical thinking, where you suffer the opposites of being reborn and all that stuff. If you think of it that way, so these guys that showed up, the three guys, are reminding him about, or somehow teaching him about this idea of Platonic philosophy, that there's this dialectic that you need to suffer, which is a dualistic dialectic. Okay, so that's why I think there are three guys. But whatever the reasons you think, that's up to you. All right. Okay. So these angels are what's called a test. So Shlomo wants to say that what distinguishes the Noach dialectic, the Aristotelian situation, from the Avraham Avinu dialectic is the fact that there's a test there. A test is another way of talking about this process of tzimtzum. Tzimtzum meaning tzimtzem, to contract. To narrow, to tzamtzem in Hebrew. You narrow your ego, you negate your negations, and that's one of these things where you have these extreme opposites and you don't know what the heck to do, so you're being tested by God. So here is, Shlomo wants to point out that these goyim, three goyim are showing up, and he has to decide whether to admit these guys. Here he just became a new Jew, and he has to invite people because that's his dialectic. He has this enormous gap there. He's got to feed the world, do chesed for the world. And all of a sudden, three of the wrong people show up. They happen to be goyim, but they have to be goyim because he's the only Jew in the world at that point. So he has a conflict. Should I invite him in? I shouldn't invite him in. If he didn't invite him in, then, like Shlomo points out, he wouldn't know about his son. He wouldn't know that there would never be any Mashiach and all this stuff. And the whole Jewish people, it wouldn't be Yitzchak. So he has to invite him in, and then he has this suffering, this test. So logically speaking, it's a moment of tzimtzum. Existentially, personally speaking, he's sweating it out. Okay, so again, I'm focusing here on the logic rather than the emotional stuff that people, usual followers of Shlomo Carlebach, find more interesting. Where are we? So Shlomo, in that section, this is 116 by the way, points out that here's an example where you have to get closer to people in order to get closer to yourself in order to get closer to God. Because the more you allow yourself to be negated as an individual, and the more you will less you will have your ego standing in the way as a strong opposition between you and other people, and the more you will be allowing yourself to move up to the higher level of the pure ideas in the mind of God and all that stuff, and have these ideas affect you. Okay, which makes me think maybe you should jump right here to, this is a very, very beautiful thing on page 180. I'm going to set my own apple cart here and jump to page 180. I'm going to stick with Avraham a little bit. And this is a beautiful example. He's talking about Sarah. A lot of focus here on Sarah. So it's the same three guys, by the way. They arrive and they want to know, where's your wife? And he says, well, she's in a tent. And then Shlomo wants to point out that she's always in a tent. Why? Because of what the tent symbolizes and what she symbolizes. In this case, we're talking about a very, well, you could say, oh, it's a lovely story, or you could take it seriously and try to make sense of it. Well, I'm taking it seriously and trying to make sense of it, and I might be wrong, but here's the way I make sense of this thing here. And if I do that, then it fits right into the system that I am peddling here, this way of thinking in terms of Platonic thinking. By the way, the Zohar is a lovely example of neo-platonic thinking with all kinds of Jewish metaphors. And here we have a perfect example of something that fits right into the Zohar. So first, Shlomo says, maybe I'll open it up so I get it right, 180. he says, she wants more than that. You know what the woman wants. She wants to be holy, but she wants more than that. She wants the Holy of Holies. You know why the woman is the one to bring children into the world? Because she's connected to the Holy of Holies. So now we got to figure out what's the Holy of Holies here. They ask him, Aye Sarah Ishtecha, where is your wife? And he answers, Hine Ba'ohel, she's always in the tent. She's always in the Holy of Holies. She was there long before me. Now, if anything is a very profound Kabbalistic sense, that certainly is. She's always in the tent, and she's always in the Holy of Holies, and she was there long before me. Now, in other chapters here, we have Shlomo saying that Avraham was the beginning of Judaism. If Avraham was the beginning of Judaism, then what was she doing in the Holy of Holies before he began Judaism? You see, it becomes very, very profound. Now, I'm sure there are lots of people that spend their whole lives studying the Zohar that can do a better job at untangling this one than I can, and there probably you could write a PhD thesis about it if you want to someday. But I'm just going to tell you off the hat, right off the bat, what I think here. All right. Let's see, where is this thing about whispering? Ah, here it is. So God whispers to Sarah, you're going to have a child. And he goes on to say here, what really happens is that God prays and we answer. God is asking of Sarah all the time, please pray for a child, please pray for a child. And then the whole thing that what characterizes Judaism, the way it should be, is that the parents really pray for the child. Okay, so we have a bunch of different things that logically don't make sense at all unless you happen to filter them through some neo-platonic metaphors of the Kabbalah, especially the Zohar is a good place to find that stuff. So if we think of going to the tree of life here, there's the Sephirot. So we have Chochmah on one side, Bina on the other side. Chochmah symbolizing Adam, Bina symbolizing the female side, Sarah. Then we have and Sarah in that sense. The Bina is like the upper mother. And then we have the same parallel thing happening at the level of Malchut, the lowest Sephirah. There we have related to the lower mother, where somehow all the ideas coming around from the higher Sephirot are somehow or other fertilizing some substrate in the world and giving birth to the world. So we have the higher mother and the lower mother. Okay, now, here I'm going to make a comparison, which is I know is a little bit far-fetched, but it's the only way I can make sense at this moment, make sense of what Shlomo's saying here. And again, I say you don't have to make sense of what Shlomo's saying. Most people don't. They just enjoy the music and just listen to the words like kind of an emotional, spiritual massage or something like that, and just don't take it very seriously. And so most people, you don't want to hear about this. But if you do have any interest in hearing about it, how does this sound? Now, if we think of what comes out of the objective history, the endless spiraling here. For example, I do Gestalt work with a person for 3 hours. At the end of the session, I ask the person, "Well, what did you get out of the session?" The person says, "Oh, well, I realized that I should be more expressive, or I should be life is more beautiful than I thought, or I realized that I want to allow myself to express my feelings more." Whatever that big word of God or existential message is comes out of it. It's almost as though God is talking to that person. They call it the Word of God. Now, if God is talking to the person in that process, what could it be that's going on in this other process, which is not a spiral, which is of some two separate realms, macrocosm, microcosm, separated by an impossible gap? What could be going on there? It can't be the same talking to God. It's got to be something different. So, what do we find here? God whispers. God whispers to Sarah. And instead of the word of God coming out of the process in the spiral, after the 3 hours of working with an endless series of opposites, here we have somehow God is whispering some pre-logical message to Sarah. You better start doing your spiral, or something like that. You better start praying. But somehow that's happening before the spiral even happens. So it's on a level of pre-speech, or before the word of God. And it's before, excuse me. It's before Avraham starts the Jewish world going, you know? It's pre-something or other, the pre-world. Before, or after, or beyond, or something or other. It's some other realm. So that whispering idea is very important. Okay? And so he's whispering her that she'd better start praying, she'd better start doing the spiral, okay? Or something like that. All right. So in that sense, and by the way, this in the if you open to the Zohar, especially, I have this wonderful book by Leo Shire, which is called The Universal Meaning of the Kabbalah, and there you find a whole discussion about the Shekhinah. So we have the Shekhinah here, the living presence of God in the world, somehow symbolized by the Holy Mother. And so here Sarah is symbolizing the parallel between the Shekhinah down here in Malchut and the relationship between in the lesser face of God in parallel to the greater face of God, Arik Anpin, where we have the pure relationship in the mind of God and the pure ideas with Chochmah Bina. So, and this parallel here. So in that sense, Sarah, being in the sense that she's reflecting the Holy Mother, the higher Mother of Chochmah Bina, is somehow there, and in that Holy of Holies, before Abraham appears on the scene even, as an individual. She's there representing the very basic relationship between Chochmah Bina, as it's paralleled in the relationship between the Shekhinah, and which is God's presence in the world, and our world. Okay, so, and it's pre-speech rather than the Word of God. This is before the Word of God. It's a little inkling that's somehow there before we get to rational thinking and intelligible language. Now, there's an exercise that's very lovely. I wonder if I have time to do this on this video. I'm going to just check how many minutes I've got in this video for a second. I've got 9 minutes. I don't know if I'll make it, but let's see if I can do this. This exercise I learned in a theater workshop from the Mabu Minds Theater Company, and I'm grateful to them for teaching this to me back about 40 years ago, 37 years ago maybe. It's called the pre-speech exercise. It's a little complicated, but once you get the idea, it's simple. Although a lot of people have trouble doing it, a lot of actors, I find it hard to teach it to them, but I personally find it not so difficult to do. All right, so here's the idea. You tell somebody, think of some image, you know, you have their exercise, prepare images. So you tell somebody, think of some image, I got an image right now, I'm going to do it. And allow yourself to talk about the image at first, and then allow your language to dissolve. Allow your speech to dissolve into what we're going to call pre-speech, something on a lower level than your rational idea of what a word is. So if I do that now, I say, and another thing is I shouldn't tell you what my private images are, because I've only got a few of them right now, and I don't want to make them public. It's because actors need to protect their privacy, so I'll protect my privacy. I'm going to start somehow talking to myself about that image, and allow that. Then I'm going to kind of see the image in my mind, I'll project it on the wall there over your head, and I'm going to zoom in with my mind, make a zoom shot, and allow the image to directly affect my my gut somehow or other, where the sound is coming from, and just somehow open up the door. And you know, they say chokhmah potech sharim, with the idea will open the gates. Okay, so let's see if I can do that now. I'm seeing my image over there. Okay, see my image, and I'll start using gibberish to describe myself. Okay, so I see. Okay, what did I do? I saw an image of something. I allowed it to magnify, felt it down here somehow in my gut, and I let that energy affect how my talking was coming out. And then as I was doing that, I was listening to the sound. What does that remind me of? What does that sound like? And at first I found it sounded like fear, but then maybe at the end it sounded like laughing. I don't know. There was something about fear and laughing, okay? But I didn't get to the idea of fear and laughing, which are rational words that fit into the Aristotelian way of thinking in terms of opposites. Rather, I allowed something pre-logical, the pre-speech, some instinct, you know. It's almost as though I'm allowing God to whisper to me what noise should come out of my mouth. And once it started coming, that was the idea of prayer. Some direct contact between me and some otherness that I'm pouring my soul into. And then once I started hearing my prayer, the sound, then I started saying to myself, now, if this is a prayer, I didn't think of prayer now, but if I think back at it now, if that was a prayer, then it was a prayer about fear, it was a prayer about laughing, maybe the idea of Yitzchak even, you know. So you see the way it worked. It worked on a pre-logical level. And in that sense, I can make sense of this is what God was doing. And in this sense, Sarah, who is a good actress and able to do pre-speech, and representing the Shekhinah process here, and the Chokhmah Bina relationship, was able to be there long before Avraham, because Avraham can only be on a level of a person that can describe his experience in words, at least so far anyway. Of course, Abraham is also a symbol of the Tzimtzum process, but somehow or other, this Holy of Holies that Shlomo is indicating here, you know, I get an association of, in those days, you know, maybe now to, of course, to now also, a lot of people were into a lot of drug trips. I mean, even I played around with some weed, and maybe Shlomo had some experiences with LSD or who knows what, and maybe he was trying to suggest some of that stuff. By the way, when I think about this, we think, you know, we can find direct parallels in the world of art. If we think of, when I opened up a book here, a description of El Greco. If you ever saw his distorted picture of, I don't know if you can see this at all, this is his picture of the city of Toledo, where he used to live in Spain. And you see the picture of the landscape is just, it looks like it could have been painted by Van Gogh. Whether Van Gogh was copying Greco or Greco was copying Van Gogh, which is impossible because Greco was about a few hundred years earlier. But anyway, you have this idea of art which is just kind of beyond the image, they say, you know, in the Mad Mind's theater world. And if I could find the way this art critic here describes it, it's very nice, fits right in. He was obsessed by figures and attitudes of strain and agitation, and evolved a style of composition in which the human models are stretched beyond their normal length to conform his ideas of rhythm and movement, by expressing the ferment of his own spirit like a fiery furnace, a world in which the bodies of men and women are pulled out of joint like elongated specters, with eyes staring heavenward and arms leaping upraised in a struggle to escape the flesh and lead to salvation in the tongues of flame, etc., etc., etc. There's no end to this. The separation of body and soul, or flesh and spirit, etc., etc., etc. Men whom the pleasures of life have not tempted, creatures in the thrall of a mystic vision, etc. Okay, so if that isn't a description of a Shlomo Carlebach minion on a Friday night, you know, I don't know what is, you know. The way these people jump around, and you know, you got, of course, I don't go quite that far with it, but some of these people, like, imagine on Simchat Torah, you know, you got bodies distorted, faces, the whole business, because it's pietism, what's called pietistic religion, Hasidism of the breslav sort, you know, Judaism. So there's this whole tradition, and that's what we're talking about here. That's what we're talking about is the covenant, the Platonic, neo-platonic covenant of Avraham Avinu, in contrast to the classical art version of dialectical thinking that you find in Noach. Okay, I'm going to get to the end of this. I'm going to stop this video here, and then I'll decide what to do about the next video. Okay, now I'm on page 133. This section is of the book is called Above and Beyond Nature. And the subtitle here from Breshit is Walk Before Me, Breshit 17:1. So here Shlomo is talking about Noach, Noach's covenant, Noach's Kabbalah, Noach's Aristotelianism, if you want to call it that, or Chabbadism. And he says by Noach it says, Et ha-Elokim hitalech Noach. Noach walked with God. And he goes on to say, now everyone knows that God has two names. Elokim, which is gematria teva, nature. Elokim is the name of God which manifests in nature. We also know that God is also the name Yod-Heh Vav-Keh, which is beyond nature, the one who created the world and who is also beyond it. So in a nutshell, Avraham Avinu connected to Yod-Heh Vav-Keh. Avraham Avinu was on a level of hitalech lefanai. Abraham was walking before nature, before God, or before nature. All right, so that's basically the same thing I was saying before. This thing about nature, this organism idea of a dialectic, the spiral is the Yod-Heh Vav, the Elohim model. Powers, different essences. So going back to Gestalt therapy, if I do one opposite after another opposite, let's say I work on my game about judging people, the top dog underdog game. So if I play in my one chair, I play the top dog talking to the underdog, the other chair. I have one essence of my personality, my judgmental side, and my other side is the feeling judged or defending myself against judgment or whatever. Those two are examples of two powers powers that I have to use, essences of my personality I can use, relatively pure ideas in this world that I can use, ways of functioning that I can learn in childhood and go ahead and do them. And I can work with a string of these games, and I can end up working with a lot of unfinished business, like I showed you in the first tape, when I was, for example, saying goodbye to a parent and undoing some of that the guilt trip and all that stuff, negating some of those negations, and this whole organic process of dealing with one pair of opposites after another. That's in the sense that we're dealing with our nature, our collection of types that make us up. You find exactly the same thing in the Michael Chekhov acting technique. He tells an actor that unless you find a way to get beyond working with these types, you're going to get dried out. You're going to get tired of performing. You'll end up being a sick man, whatever it is. He wants people to get to the place where they can be beyond the types and into their true individuality, their I consciousness, or whatever he calls it, all kinds of things. Using a higher self, soul. Right, so here it is exactly the same thing here in theology terms here. So here we have Noach walking along with God. Noach is embodying exactly this here and now awareness level of divinity, of spirituality. There's a certain amount of the tzimtzum, death of ego process going inside the rhythm of contact flagello going on, but it's not the main thing. Okay, the extremes are not totally opposite. You don't have a kind of a tormented Van Gogh or El Greco type personality here. You have basically rational personality, that the kind that Rambam in his guide is pointing out to be the ideal prophet, the person that's a reasonable person that has balanced his right side of intuition and his right side, his chokhmah side, his avraham side with his Yitzchak side, his left side, his Bina side, and Yaakov is the middle way, the healthy person. Of course, Maimonides was a doctor, and he probably would have been a good Gestalt therapist. In fact, in those days, he might have been doing it because there's nothing so new about Gestalt therapy. People have been talking to Dibbuks and all kinds of stuff for thousands of years, probably. Okay, so that's now. What about the other side? So let's see what else we can say about that. Maybe I already said it. Noah. Okay, so since Noah is basically a rational, normal person, he can't talk to God like Abraham could talk to God. So we have a certain preset idea of what it is to talk to God here. That, of course, Shlomo is using it, but he's not telling us what it is. And here again, I part the ways with SHLOMO CARLEBACH. I like to spell out what I'm doing to people, and so we can understand it together. And I think we can, in the long run, go further that way, although a lot of people need that kind of a spiritual massage on Friday night that they get from him. So there's a need for both kinds of teachers in the world. All right, so here I go now. In what sense is Avraham talking to God that Shlomo is not talking to God, and how can we understand this process perfectly well with Gestalt therapy? I already said something about that in the previous tape, but let's say it again here. If I get to extreme opposites, and then I go inside, and I find new images, a strong image that I can then identify with, work with, and then that image now encompasses the two opposites on a higher level. In that sense, I can go from being extremely tormented, the kind of state you might get to if you're trying to sell shoes in the city of Rome for the whole year, and suddenly it's Yom Kippur, and you're just allowing yourself to just be totally express your despair, something like that. Because Shlomo's talking about extremes. He's talking about this kind of pietistic religion here of people that are looking for the highs, want to get high on God. He has a thing about it. God gets me high. He made a song out of it. So he's not looking for everyday God. He's not saying God make me reasonable so I can adjust to society. He's saying God get me high so I can get out of society into some other place. And here's how you do it. This process with the tzimtzum, where you go inside and get to the higher levels. Now, in the Gestalt therapy model, it's not so easy to see the difference. But if we shift over to another model, we see the thing very clearly, and that's take Brechtian theater. Bertolt Brecht, I hope you heard of him, who was talking about an alternative to Stanislavski theater, Stanislavski being the one that was based on the Noach model, and here we have a theater based on the Avraham model. And that is like this. You do some preparatory work in your life, you go through some emotional stuff. You could do this Gestalt back and forth thing for a while and get some spirals going. But then you need to find a way to separate yourself that. So you're not just using those types of personality thing that you found in your life, but you're getting to a level of what we call individuality. Michael Chekhov would call individuality. And the way they conceptualize it in the theater and also in art, for example, you see sort of, this is romanticism, all kinds of stuff in history of art. For example, take one of these paintings, pop art where you have what's called a junk collage. You have pictures of Marilyn Monroe and a tube of toothpaste and the Brooklyn Bridge and all stuff thrown together on a canvas, and you as a performer, or take Chagall when he presents his pictures of a shtetl in Russia or something like that. You as an observer are somehow being invited to not to make sense of it with your spiral, but rather to get beyond that image and to allow yourself to trip on it, to find here and now ideas, associations, that'll take you to some higher place. So in the theater jargon, the actors have a jargon for everything, so they talk about going beyond the image, performer on top of his material. Okay. So there it is. Now where are these images? Say if I'm a performer now, I gave you an example before. If I had this form of waving, and now I start playing with it in all kinds of ways, like a child is a perfect example of a person who has this freedom to use the ideas in a totally here and now, spontaneous, messianic way. So we have the junk collage of my forms of all the different tracks that I built up. I built up a character with a voice track and an image track and a body track, and all these different tracks are doing different things. A movement track, whatever you want to call it. And then there's all kinds of stuff going on in the mise en scène and the staging and everything. So you have a collection of 50 different opposites here, where the audience is suddenly experiencing, and the audience, the actor now is showing the audience how he himself is free to, in a sense, mock these forms that he was stuck in before when he put his character together, and to play here and now with whatever inspiration he's getting. And what they call the epic, the comment, the actor comment, is a way of crystallizing that into an aesthetic. So Frecht would have would write into the script a place where the character would be commenting on the action, or if it's a play without a script so much, or there would be spaces where the actor's actions or whatever could show that he's free from the character. He's just putting in something else there to force you, what's called an alienation effect, to break you out of this spiral, this Aristotelian model of theater, to get you to this epic theater or Platonic, neo-platonic theater model that he represents. Of course, his aesthetic was coming from Marx, which is a derivative from the traditional dialectical wisdom, whatever it is. Okay, so that's the idea of the performer going beyond the image, illuminating that form, even if it's a simple form like high, and making it into something else, but it's still high. It's still high, but it's illuminated into something else by the here and now ideas that I'm getting. Now this idea, now that idea, now that idea. And I'm playing with it, but I know it's somehow high. It's still high. It's still high. Okay, and the pre-speech was another example of how to free up your behavior from and get to that pre-logical, pre-Genesis, you might say, state. Okay, so that's 33. Avraham was absolutely, in page 134, Avraham was absolutely beyond nature. Why was he beyond nature? Because he was serving God beyond nature, beyond his own nature. Okay, Avraham was like a breathtaking actor, mocking his forms, going beyond his forms, and just doing the most outrageous things. His nature is to invite people, a couple of people to his house, but he went beyond nature by inviting the whole world to his house in order to teach. First of all, to discover himself some higher wisdom, but also to teach the world about chesed. So Shlomo says here, begging people. Can you imagine somebody mamish begging people to come and visit them and come to their house? Beyond nature. It's crazy. It's beyond nature. Right? Like Nachman of breslav. He's another pietistic chassid here. He tells people, go. God, sometimes you have to roll in the mud to get to find God. You have to break out of your preconceptions of who you are, your types, and get to your true individuality, you might say, where it comes out of the negation of your negations, all the canceling out all your opposites and getting to that pure flow of pure ideas that comes out of the void. All right. So now he's comparing on 134, Shlomo's comparing Noach and on himself, and on Avraham, when it comes to talking to God. So Noach is on the level of nature. I am a creature and God is God, and I have nothing to tell him. But if I am on the level of beyond nature, why can't I also speak to God? If I am on the level of bubbeh vavke, then I am beyond nature. I know that nothing has to be. Not only does nature not have to be, but even what seems like Hashem has decreed can be altered for the good. Okay, there it is. Now, what exactly what happens in this rhythm of contact and withdrawal? A person goes crazy with opposites one after the other, but gets to the extreme where he can't possibly solve it rationally, so he leaves his spiral behind. And in this despair or this total joy or total orgasm, whatever trip he's into, he goes inside and finds some new direction there. And that new idea, and we're talking about an explosion, a kind of a primal scream rather than a gestalt kind of gentle saying goodbye to somebody here. This explosive quality, this spastic, we saw in El Greco and Van Gogh, this kind of bizarre, almost pathological. Some people would say it is pathological. You know, that reminds me of that Hassidic story. You know, people go by, they see the Hasidim dancing, you know, and they think they're crazy or something like that. I don't know what. Okay. So in that sense, the word, the pure ideas that are coming out of that performer on top of his material, is right out of the right out of the oven. It's right out of God. It's before it formulates into a clear opposite, and it's so far separated from that world of forms and preconceptions and tracks that the actor has set up, and now he's able to do it loosely because he's worked on those forms so he can do them loosely, so that when the actor now beams into that junk collage of imagery that those forms he's created, this here and now stream of ideas, that he's illuminating those forms with here and now input, and we get what some people in the theater call star quality, or they call it live form instead of dead form, and here in a Gestalt sense, we say that the person that is dealing with this series of his opposites there in the Noach dialectic and the Gestalt spirals in the spiral thing is dealing with a series of types, what they call in philosophically speaking myths, personal myths. There's an exercise in the maysehs theater working on your personal myths. In other words, working on the series of opposites that you work through, your games, making theater out of that. But then, since it's maysehs, post-directing and theater, once you put that score together, then you are here and now free to get above those myths and show the audience that even though they admit that they're things that your personality would naturally be stuck in, you are not stuck because you're representing the freeness of a performer who is in touch with something higher than everyday bourgeois reality, you might say. Okay, let's see. Is there anyone? Here's another example on the level of human behavior. Shlomo says, difference between a true friend and in other words, platonic friend, and a false friend, an aristotelian friend. Right here, two people have an argument. And they say, I'm never going to talk to you again. And next thing you know, 5 minutes later, they're on the phone again. Why? Because this sudden explosion of here and now ideas that comes out of the love is able to negate the negations that cause the split, the extreme split, and bring it back to something that would be more characteristic at the level of pure ideas. All right. We talked about Shlomo, going back to the Noach model here. Shlomo talks about the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood. How they couldn't just die off. They had to keep coming back. And in other words, it's karma, it's unfinished, this personal mythology that keeps going on, bad karma, they had to keep coming back. So these are the same guys that came back as slaves in Egypt, and they came back on Sinai again. Because they had to complete the dialectic there. They had to keep working on the spiral here. So since they were from the generation of Noach, they were in this spiral Aristotelian dialectic. Whereas Avraham now represents a different kind of dialectic. All right? Another example that Shlomo uses here, people that who have the wrong idea, in other words, disagree with him. So Shlomo says, what God wants me to do is not only to be the most I can be, in other words, not just to make my spiral as high as it can go, but rather, you know, friends, I always say that today there is a big movement in the world to realize my potentials. As far as I'm concerned, this is really pagan, in other words, Aristotelian. God doesn't want me just to realize my potentials. For that, I don't need the Torah. For that, we go to a psychiatrist. We go to a Gestalt session, of course, with the spiral, and have an intensive weekend, and I have some very deep, intensive relationship, and then I utilize and realize all my potentials. Now, that fits right in with the Aristotelian idea that actuality is prior to potentiality. Okay? But except it's a very distorted presentation of the idea, because he's making a caricature out of some very profound philosophical tradition here, because it suits his political needs to peddle his own shtick here. But really, it's not so black and white, you know. It's a matter of emphasis. Working on my pairs of opposites, one after the other, in a spiraling Aristotelian model here, the Noach thing, is true. Getting to some actuality, which is more prior to or more messianic than all the opposites I'm stuck in. That's the way of looking at it. But on the other hand, most of the time we need to do that preliminary work before we're ready to have these explosions into these platonic mystical moments. You know, the model Shlomo seems to be advocating here is some kind of instant high. As if I remember correctly, in the introduction to the Gestalt therapy verbatim, Fritz Perls makes a point about he's very much against the current generation who's into this instant high business, because he's stressing that this process of working on the opposites and working through the different sides of your personality and labor, all that stuff is very important. We need that. And he was experiencing in those days all kinds of people who were on dope and all kinds of encounter groups and all kinds of stuff where people are spaced out in one way or another and leaving their not just their brains behind, but also their ability. They're not just leaving their deductive logic, but they're leaving most of their inductive logic behind also, because they're trying to short circuit the process of the dialectic, the phenomenology, the spirit here, this unfolding process of that's very important, to jump to the platonic explosion, sudden experiences. Well, some people naturally can do that trip, but I would say most people need a proper balance between a certain amount of Aristotle, a certain amount of Plato, a certain amount of Noach, a certain amount of Avraham. We need them both. We need the middle way, and it's an illusion to think that we could, to be one or the other. I'm not saying that Shlomo was silly enough to to be just an Avraham man and not a Noach man. No, he was also very aware of the need for the balance, and in the course of his life, he had all influenced all kinds of people in all kinds of ways. But I'm just picking out a couple of things here where it's easy to misinterpret him and see him as too much on the too much into the Breslav trip and not enough into the Chabad trip. When we know from his life that he was influenced very much by all kinds of teachers, and his stories and his teachings show all kinds of wisdom. But I'm just making a point here of showing that there are these two covenants, and he himself says it. There's the Noach covenant and there's the Avraham covenant, and we need. He's obviously saying that he prefers the Avraham covenant, but he realizes the other one is important also. God says that the world will go on. He gives Noach the covenant that the world will not be destroyed. This endless process of awareness has to happen. At the same time, there is the possibility of going beyond that. Another story, another section where he deals with the same thing is, where is it here? 149, page 149. Beyond names, beyond words, again. So here we have again a very important idea here, that when I do awareness, I'm aware of this, I'm aware of a bright yellow light in my face here. I'm aware of something yellow, bright. That's awareness, okay? I'm aware of some blackness there that has crisscrosses, and that my logical mind now tells me that that's some kind of a crate. And now I'm aware of yellowness here, and then I recognize that as a pole holding up a lights, things like that. Okay, when I do a series of awareness moments like that, every time I'm aware of something, I'm naming God in a certain way, because each of those awareness moments is another name of God, and another way of describing reality. If I go on for 3 hours and aware of a million things, then I'm basically tabulating the glory of God, all these things that add up to the Hebrew is koved, tangibility. Glory is translated in Hebrew as koved, tangibility of God. Every moment of awareness is another tangible moment of reality, experience. You call it God if you like. Okay. So here in this chapter, he's going beyond names, beyond words. So what does he say? There are two kinds of names in the world. Sometimes I call a person who, because they're far away, I need their attention. So when I say I'm aware of that brightness over there, yellowness, I'm paying attention to that. I'm giving that's a moment of contact. Then he says, now imagine there's something else. There is somebody I love very much, and I can't stop saying their name. It's the deepest depths there is. There are relationships, where we find ourselves trapped thinking about that person or feeling about that person, whether we like it or not. That love idea, that something bigger than our rational minds keeps popping up like a, sometimes like a nightmare. All right. So he says here, after Avraham entered the covenant with God, God revealed to him that the covenant is that place which is no name. It's beyond, like we said, beyond the spiral, beyond the being able to say I'm aware of this, aware of that. It's that getting to the place where the opposites are so extreme and your need is so great that you're able to go beyond the opposites, like the performer that's on top of his junk collagen material, and somehow mock those elements and be freed from them, and then living here and now. So that's the other kind of dialectic, which is beyond, he calls it beyond choice, beyond the x and the minus x's all the time. So here's another way of talking about the same thing, but in terms of naming. So when I see the word Hashem, to me what that means is the naming. I translate that as the naming of God, not so much as the name, because the name implies one thing, whereas the naming process is endless. That's how I see it anyway. Okay. And on the next page here, 150, Shlomo says, the beginning of Vayera is Avraham Avinu having the highest God revelation. But what is so deep is that God didn't say anything. Right, that's exactly the rhythm of contact and withdrawal. The extremes are so opposite. So there's nothing to say, you go into the void, and there you find some new ideas, and the void comes out of the silence, out of nothing is happening. Or if the void comes out of sounds, they're on a level of pre-speech, which I demonstrated before, where the sounds are coming from below the level of, you don't have a daydream where you're saying to somebody, hello, I see you there, blah, blah, blah. Rather, usually the garble of sounds and images is very disorganized. It's coming from all kinds of places because your unconscious there is much, pre-speech is much freer than rational speaking. So it's, in a sense, it's non-verbal. All right? By the way, we have the same concept in Gestalt therapy. They talk about the difference between poetry and verbalizing. So here, in this context, we're talking about verbalizing would be this, the misuse of the Gestalt technique with too much emphasis on yak, 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 and not enough emphasis on getting to those moments of extremes and opposites and finding new ideas in the void and all that stuff. And without, so in that case, the new idea is just like the performer on top of his material, getting ideas here and now. It's what we call, what the Gestalt people would call poetic language. Language as expressing, being totally involved in the here and now experience so that the words are being illuminated poetically rather than just coming out functionally as serving some kind of overall logical pattern or something like that. So in that sense, a Brechtian theater would be more poetic than an Aristotelian theater where the actor is serving some kind of a spiraling super objective that he somehow knows is where it's going, whereas in a Brechtian theater, a performer is more open to the here and now inspiration. In that sense, there's a certain freedom that's there that's not so much so in the Aristotelian and Stanislavski theater. Okay, what else we got here? And again, here's a beautiful example. Shlomo takes the Akedah moment. Here we have Avraham, totally distraught. Kill him, not to kill him. God says I should kill him, but on the other hand, God couldn't possibly mean that. So here we have a total. If that's that's a perfect example of one of these stuck impasse moments where even if he tried to be rational about it and tried to solve it in some kind of a spiraling way here, he can't, because the gap is so huge that he has to be at the point where he doesn't know long enough to discover some new source of ideas. All right, which reminds me, a very important. I want to jump now to page 153. It's called Most Powerful. And the quote from Breshit says, "A little bit of water be brought." I don't have the Tanakh here to give it to you exactly what it says in. I do, but I don't want to take the time to dig it out. So Abraham is saying that he wants to kill an ox or something to feed these three guests. On the other hand, which makes him sound, according to Shlomo here, which makes him sound like he's very generous, but then he's saying a little water would be brought. Ma'at mayim. And Shlomo was making a big deal out of making a mountain out of that molehill about that it says a little mayim rather than a lot of mayim. Actually, it would be kind of silly if Abraham said at that moment, "Hey, bring a whole bunch of water," so that these guys can wash their feet. That would be, but anyway, okay, let's let that go by for now, and let's see what the logic is here. Yukachna ma'at mayim. That's what it says here. Take a little water to wash your feet. Suddenly Avraham is stingy and he says, save the energy, just take a little bit of water. So then now, the association that Shlomo gets here is that, first of all, we're dealing with the word water here, which is a powerful symbol in Kabbalah, has different levels. Maybe I'll take a moment about that for a moment to explain that and how I see the word water. And then I'll go back to the page 153. The way I understand it, but I'm not claiming to know everything about the Kabbalah at all, but I know at least that I see three levels of water. First of all, there's the level of the creation, Shamayim, the heavens. combination of Eish and Mayim, Shamayim. So what are those waters? Somehow that's pre-creation on a high level. So if we go back to the Platonic model here of four levels of worlds, Atziliut, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya. Okay, so the level of Bria is the level of the world of pure ideas in a Platonic sense, and that's somehow separated by a big gap from the level of ideas, the same ideas as they function in a person's life, either as authentic ideas, on Yetzirah, or as ideas with all kinds of achirut, and turbulence, self-interruptions, all the games people play on the first level. So we have four levels here. Putting aside for now the Astilat, the highest level of God, I see there's a word for water on each of the other three levels. On the level of Shamayim, we have the Bria, pure idea, you might say, in the world of pure ideas. We have the word waters, the waters, Shamayim, the waters, plural. Okay, in that sense, we have a whole gazillion pure ideas all swirling around together somehow in this infinite space or mindset or whatever of the Bria, the world of ideas. Coming down to the next level, Yetzirah, we have, let me see, where is it? Water. Oh yeah, okay, now I get my bearings. There was a moment I got lost. So we have four levels. Think of the alchemy model here. We have water, earth. I should do it this way for you. Water, this is on the side, left side, you know, from level of Bina, water. Earth, Malchut, where everything gets into opposites. And then air, the Tzimtzum moment, the void opens up. And then fire, where the new idea comes into the void. So again, think in terms of the Aristotelian, the spiraling model, and the flow of awareness in a 3-hour session on working on awareness, which is focused more on centering and not so much on the extremes. In that situation, the water is what we would call in the Platonic model a level of Yetzirah, where we have pure ideas, pure essences of my personality, which are flowing the way they're supposed to flow. And of course it never happens, because we always have, self-interruptions. Remember, in the first video I talked about confluence, no awareness, introjection, a debek or something like that. You're possessed by somebody's personality. Projection, you're projecting all your needs onto other people, they're doing it to you. Retroflection, all your energy is focused on your own body, your compulsions. And finally, egotism, where you're stuck in a self-image. Those are the ways that the level of ideas in your personality, which in Gestalt therapy they call essences, those essences become polluted and are moved down from the level of Yetzirah to the level of Asiya and lower than that even, depending on how polluted they are. So we have this idea of water as, in the alchemical sense, as where you have some pure personality essence or something that's coming down in you, actually it's on this side, and it stays pure. You happen to have a healthy childhood with loving parents or whatever, and so you become a kind of a model of a person that's very pure and embodying all the virtues that you're supposed to embody as a normal, healthy, balanced, middle-way personality, if there is such a person. Maybe you're one of the 36 Lamed Bobniks that somehow or other are the pillars of the world, whatever. But so that idea, that's water as an alchemical thing. So now we have waters, which is pre-speech, very level, and we have water without the S, which is on the Yetzirah level. Now, do we find any example? How would we talk about the other kind of water when it's polluted? Well, we could say polluted water, you know. Mayim means achirut. Achirut means turbulence, pollution. Use the Gestalt terminology, we could say it's self-interruptions, games people play. That's what we're talking about. But do we have a religious model of the same thing? We do. And I found it. If we open up likutei moharan of Nachman of Breslav, and remember, he's just like, he's very much a Platonic mystic, just like SHLOMO CARLEBACH is. We have the idea of water, water. If you open up likutei moharan to section 51 in the first volume, you find, I have it right here. Oops. 51. It says here, Amar Rebbe Akiva, Rabbi Akiva said, when you approach the pure marble stones, do not say water, water, as it is said. He who speaks falsely will not be sustained before my eyes. All right? And he goes on to say, falsehood is harmful to the eyes. The eyes become dim with tears. And now he starts using his alchemical vocabulary here. So if we think of the water, that's on the level of Yetzirah, which is a person's personality that he's received from the purer idea, from the waters, and now he's on the level of water. What happens when he starts being false? He starts descending from Yetzirah level, the soul level, to Asiyah level, the body level, the everyday reality level. So now he's moving from alchemically from water to earth. And earth, by the way, is Malchut, Klippa, the shells, the dead shells, the evil, all that stuff where the opposites become very extreme. He's entering the level of pietism here. So, the clever metaphor that Nachman of Breslav uses is salty tears, which is a mixture of water from Yetzirah and earth, the soul, from Asiyah, the fourth level now. And the way that he symbolizes it, he wants to give it a label. He doesn't want to say water. It's still water when it's full of earth. He gives it a special name. He calls it water, water. In other words, excess. Somehow you take that pure idea, let's say, of honesty, or you take the idea of love, or you take the idea of courage, let's say courage, and you overdo courage, it becomes, arrogance or fanaticism or something like that. Then it becomes, instead of water, the pure idea of water becomes water, water, which is a polluted idea of water. It's a mixture of water and... Okay, so now we have, that's all we really need from Nachman of Breslav, right now. This is about Shlomo, not about Nachman of Breslav, although basically you can read likutei moharan and know where Shlomo is coming from, and it's a pretty good, pretty parallel in most instances. Okay, let's see. So now going back to, now that I established my jargon here, let's go back to 53. A little bit of water, okay? So you can bring a whole ox with just a little bit of water. Why? Because water is being used in this very special sense here. Since these are angels here that we're dealing with, we're on a level of pure ideas. We're on a level of B'riyah. This is not everyday reality. Remember, this is the place where, Sarah is off there in the Holy of Holies, everybody's functioning on a level of the higher macrocosmic stuff. This is all macrocosm here. And so on the macrocosm level, the waters with a plural, macrocosm, is the Shemayim, the pure idea of creation that's about to unfold here. And on that level, even a drop of a pure idea from the world of pure ideas in the macrocosm is going to be what he calls, what Shlomo's going to call later, let it be clear that to us what the Ribono Shel Olam gave us is the strongest dynamite in the world, the strongest atomic power. So all of these things that characterize basic Judaism, Judaism 101, are these pure Platonic ideas. And Shlomo is saying these ideas have to come from the world of pure Platonic ideas. They cannot be on the level of everyday ideas like courage. They have to be from another level. Okay? So the examples Shlomo is using is chabbad, or what are the examples? Yiddishkeit, Torah, Israel. Any one of these ideas is atomic stuff, nuclear, ready to explode into and just blast to pieces the measly Aristotelian universe of life. Excuse me. You know, in the internet, there was this gruesome example of what I was talking about here. You have some demonic mind here. Here's an example of dangers of excess Platonic fanaticism. This guy decides he's got a dog. Doesn't like the dog for some reason or other. His profession happens to be selling explosives, fireworks. What does he do? He takes the poor dog, puts some kind of a collar around the dog with dynamite, and blows the dog to pieces. Somehow or other the police got wind of it, so the guy's in big trouble now. Okay, but what was he doing? He was taking an atomic idea of some kind of purity that this guy had in his mind, and somehow he saw this dog is polluting it with too much nature, too much Aristotelian spiraling logic here. He doesn't want his pure Platonic idea of love or truth or sanity or whatever is to be disturbed. So he blows the dog to pieces, and he's it's a parody of too much Plato, you know. So the history is full of mishuganas like that, and I'm sure a lot of people see Shlomo Carlebach as exactly that kind of a threat to their Aristotelian idea. For example, the Chabad idea. You know, probably a lot of Chabad rabbis would see the later Shlomo Carlebach, who after he left their tribe, you know, as a threat to them. It's because, you know, some guy that could just blow our whole school, blow our whole trip to pieces here. You know, if they find out that, if they start seeing him as a Chabad, they go, wait. Okay, I'm not going to get into all that politics here. I'm staying on the level of pure logic. All right. So in that sense, we've just cracked the code of 1/5 most powerful here, the bit of water. So the bit of water is waters. Bring in a little bit of waters, in other words, Torah, pure Platonic Torah, pure Platonic idea of Israel, pure Platonic idea of Shabbat, you know, and that'll blow to pieces any phony idea of these things. All right. What else we got here? Check the clock again. I have about 13 minutes left, and I'll try to squeeze this in here. I'm turning to page 142. This chapter is called The Ultimate Question. So it's dealing with Mashiach. That's a pretty sensational topic to end a tape with. Shlomo starts saying, the tzaddikim gathered together before God and asked him, "You are creating the world, but when are you sending Mashiach? When are you redeeming the world?" Okay, so that's the ultimate question. And Shlomo is going to make a distinction here between that kind of question, ultimate question about Mashiach, which in a sense will blow the whole thing apart, with the other kind of questions, which are haggling kind of questions, this or that, I should do this, should wear that, shouldn't wear that, I should say that, shouldn't say that. And so the main point Shlomo wants to make, first of all, is that, like he says, he gives an example of you want to tell somebody, some woman you want to marry her, okay? So are you going to tell her yourself, or are you going to send a messenger? Well, obviously you tell her yourself, you wouldn't send a messenger. And even something as important as the redemption of the world, Shlomo disapproves of sending messages. For example, Moses, in this context, was merely a messenger, and the written Torah that was received on Sinai is merely a message. But it's not the main thing. This sounds a little bit like Shabtai Tzvi and all that kind of stuff. Shlomo says, there are certain questions where I don't even want God to send me a messenger via a prophet to let you know. Now listen to this deepest depths. I want you to open your hearts. The Torah was given to us through a messenger, through Moshe Rabbeinu. Basically, the Torah is not so much about questions and answers. So he's saying the questions and answers that were answered by the Torah that was received on Mount Sinai are not really what the Torah about. That's the written Torah, but the Torah Shebal Peh, the Torah that is spoken Torah, in other words, which comes out of living experience here and now in a person's life as an individual, is somehow in a much higher level than the endless questions and answers that are somehow a rational mind. Even if we speak inductively, in Gestalt therapy, as long as it's an endless series of spiraling without a logical break that jumps off into the unknown, it's not kosher somehow. It's still on a level of written Torah, because it's dealing with X minus X issues, haggling, even on the biggest levels of haggling. It's still, for example, unfinished business when you're saying goodbye to a parent, and suddenly you work 3 hours and you work to yourself at a very high level and you're expressing your sadness, you're crying and all that stuff. But if it happened organically, slowly, little by little, it almost doesn't qualify as an explosion. Fritz Perls would say, oh, but it's an explosion, but on a very low level. That's different than the kind of sensationalized explosion we're talking about here in the Platonic model. Shlomo says, everybody knows that on Tisha B'Av we don't learn Torah. In other words, we don't learn written Torah. We don't want to learn the Torah, which was given to me through Moshe Rabbeinu. I only want to hear the answer from God because Mashiach is God's answer. The idea that it's true, he mentions here that God somehow tells them to Avraham that the answer to the big question of all, for example, why do the Jews inherit this land, has to come from the messianic idea, this kind of explosive Platonic model. Because the Jews want to hear each individual wants to hear the answer from God himself. So this goes back to the idea of contact and withdrawal. I do all this work, I get to the extreme opposites, like this is again, nachman of breslav, as a pietist would say, you find God in the city of Rome where things were so screwed up, so opposite, so, it makes you think of Saint Genet, the novel that Sartre wrote about, this arch villain Genet, at least from a puritanical point of view, that somehow or other finds God through his evil and through all kinds of stuff he does. It's that kind of an example here, because the individual on the deepest personal level of Platonic ideas coming from the void and all that stuff out of the extreme opposites of suffering and longing, for example, Abraham and Sarah longing for the child. The child somehow doesn't really deserve to be born until he's been longed for 100 years. The extremes of emotions here, this is a kind of Il Greco, Van Gogh world here, that the Carlebach Torah and lifestyle is. And for this reason it appeals to this kind of emotionally driven, very highly fired up crowd, and there's a lot of beauty in that, as long as it's balanced, of course, by the other side. And the trouble is, for example, a person like me, now here I am giving over what I would say is a very important attempt to make sense out of a lot of the Shlomo Carlebach's jargon and stories and emotional brouhaha. And I probably will be totally rejected by that community because I'm trying to make sense out of something which really should be nonsense, should be above and beyond logic and all that stuff. I'm interfering with this pure emotional bliss of the Carlebach minion. Well, if that happens, that's a shame, you know. Just like it has happened with my experience with the Breslavers. They don't know and they don't want to know when it comes to the philosophical foundations of their religion. I hope the same thing doesn't happen with the Carlebach people, but so far it has happened. We'll see if it will happen. Okay, so I think I said most of what I want to say here. So again, from Avraham Avinu on, God wanted to show miracles in regard to children. So this is a religion based on miracles, pietism, faith, contortions, extremes, which is beautiful to an extent, as long as there's also the other side, the Aristotelian, the Maimonides, the rationalism, the chabbad, we need them both, and we need a proper balance. We need a person capable of going with the emotional explosions, and also a person not willing to be just a lemming following a guru. We need a balance, middle way. Of course, Carlebach religion, just like breslav, the emphasis is on the side of on the Platonic dialectic. That's fine, as long as it's balanced. Okay, I'd like to see that. Unfortunately, I'm not seeing it. My experience with Breslavers and Carlebachers so far is too much emotions, not enough thinking. No problem of finding thinking among the Chabadniks, but there you have to dig to find the emotions. So I don't know. I don't have the answers. But I think I see the question pretty clearly, and I think this book helps me to see better exactly the situation and what it is and why it is. Okay, so that's it for now. I'm probably going to go on and make more videos about Carlebach. There's a lot more here to find, but I think I've done a decent job a little bit with exploring the idea of what is a covenant and the two opposite covenants and how Shlomo deals with them in various anecdotes here, stories. All right. Thank you.